Hello and welcome to the Virtuous Life and happy Advent again. We are it'll be the fourth week of Advent when you hear this show, our last week of Advent. And I am so excited because we have with us today somebody who's been on the Virtuous Life before and hopefully will be again in the future. He was on, a year or so ago, and we talked about Fulton J. Sheen. I think he did an article on him. He now has a book out on him, which I hope to get to and read and interview him on that. But today, because this fits so nicely with the theme of Advent, I've been really blessed. God just kind of drops things in my lap because I keep thinking, what am I going to do for Advent? Should I do a series of shows? And I decided not to and just see where the Lord took me. And he is providing perfect books for me during this time frame. And he did it again. So for the fourth week of Advent, we have with us Derek Rotty. And he is a freelance author who lives in Jackson, Tennessee with his wife and 5 children. He holds advanced degrees in history and theology and has written extensively on Catholic history and culture, evangelization, and catechesis in the family. And you can find out more about him and his work at Derek Rotty, and it's ROTTY.com. So go to that website and find out all about Derek. Welcome, Derek. So nice to have you with us today.
It's good to be back, Pat, as always.
I must admit, and the book, I forgot to tell the audience, the book we're talking about is Praying with Sacred Art, Pondering the Mystery of Redemption through Visio Divina. So, Derek, first of all, can you explain, our audience, I'm sure, have heard me talk about and heard other people on this station talk about Lectio Divina, but talk to us about Visio Divina.
Sure. Well, yeah, it is related to Lectio Divina in that, excuse me, in Lectio Divina, the text of Scripture provides the focal point of our prayer, right? And we open up a conversation with God through the text. Visio Divina takes a piece of visual art, and usually it's a painting, but it could also be a sculpture. It could be in some senses, it could be film. It could be, a variety of visual arts. But in the case of my book, it's paintings from the classical periods of the church. And what it does is it uses those paintings, those images, to see something of the divine, right? Visio Divina means divine sight or divine looking. And so the process sort of just takes this image and then using the details of the image, the artistic details, opens up that conversation with the Lord. And this is what I do in the book. I kind of walk through a number of pieces that open up questions in my own mind, or ought to open up questions in the person looking at the piece of art about that conversation with God. So the book is not an art history book. The book is not a history book at all. There are details of history. There are particular artistic, technical explanations when those things are necessary and helpful, but it's really about the conversation with the Lord that gets opened up through the eyes and looking at these pieces of art.
So, Derek, is this something new for you as far as your own prayer experience? How did you get into this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I have my conversion. I was baptized a Christian, and grew up that way. But I kind of strayed from the faith, at least in practice, if not in acceptance of the beliefs. And then when I came back to Christianity, right, I found my way into the church, and one of the big steps in that was a beautiful piece of architecture in St. Louis, Missouri, the Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis, that just captivated me and drew me to God through beauty. And that remained with me as I began to grow in the faith. I took up roles in catechesis, particularly as a RCIA team member at that time, RCIA, now OCIA, a youth minister, a school teacher. And I noticed, especially as I was giving lessons on history and theology, that it was always beneficial for me to have a visual image to kind of focus the lesson, the points that I wanted to make, and I would often draw from these great pieces of art.
Okay.
And so along the way, I'm doing this a little bit, here and there. And then what happened in the case of this book is I write for Catholic Exchange, which I've been on the show before with some of that content, but I proposed to them, the editor at the time, a series of articles for Advent, just for Advent, reflecting on 4 pieces of art that connected with the 4 gospel readings for the 4 Sundays of Advent. And they loved it. They said, go for it. So I did it. And it went so well that they wanted me to extend that series into the next seasons and into Lent and into Easter and Pentecost. And so I just did it. And by the end, they said, well, we're kind of interested in making this a book. And, so there it is, right? So the Lord clearly guided that process just by me, trying to do my own Visio Divina of, wow, this is, I love looking at art from the rich history of the church, and I love writing, and so I'll do these 2 things together, and then the Lord blessed it for sure.
Can I'm curious, because do you have any kind of background, though, in art history that you know of these works of art that you go to for this Visio Divina? How? Because I want to know if somebody's out there listening, and I certainly would encourage them. This is a great book, but how would they know what pieces to look at, or how did you? Do you have a background?
Yeah. Well, I am a historian by first, academic training. I was not an art historian, though, right? But I had a professor as an undergraduate who wanted us to create what he called a memory museum, and it was a set of iconic images that could open up to us the understanding of the content that he was teaching. And I have used that idea so much in my own teaching. But in this case, there were some pieces that when I started, I knew very clearly that I would want to use. I can reference specifically Henry Tanner's The Annunciation, which I deal with in the book.
Right.
Grunwald's Isenheim altarpiece. These iconic pieces. But then what would happen is I would basically do a Lectio Divina on the gospel passages that were appropriate to the unfolding of the liturgical year, particularly in Advent and Lent. And so after I did the Lectio on it, whatever would come out in the Lectio, these ideas, this conversation with the Lord, I would know what I would be looking for in pieces of art. Okay. And so then I'd just Google, those themes related to sacred art or the particular scriptural event, and I'd get a whole bunch of options. And so what I would have to do is I knew there was Rembrandt and I knew there was Rubens and I knew, right? I knew of all those artists just from my own study over the years. And then I would have to look at those particular pieces and decide which, based on the themes that I thought the Lord was drawing out, which pieces would really make those points best. So it was it was a joyful labor. I loved doing it, but it got pretty grueling when I was having to do this, and produce the next article, 1 week at a time, but it was a joy. It was great. But
I think that's a great instruction for all of us, if we want to enter more deeply into the event, the actual kind of contemplate. I think, and I'm going to throw this out, Derek, to see if you agree with this, but do you think actually you did Lectio with the passage, but then by actually Googling a picture of the event, Did that draw you deeper into the actual experience, almost a contemplative type thing, where they tell you to visualize being there or being in the situation? Is that what art did for you?
Oh, absolutely. I think of particularly Jacques Tissot, who was a French, really more like a watercolor sketch artist in the 19th century, and he did a whole series of gospel paintings of the Gospels, where he does every single event. Like, he walks through the Gospels and he has artistically rendered every part of the Gospels. And most of his work now hangs in the Brooklyn Museum up in New York. But yes, to answer your question specifically, it helps to have those visual images because we are incarnate beings. We have senses, and our senses are intended to be a first route that God uses to speak to our intellect and to our will, which ultimately means that our senses can lead us more deeply into prayer.
Right.
And so that's what I tried to access.
It was wonderful. So one of the other things, Derek, that you bring out, and I don't know, I feel like our culture struggles with this understanding, so I kind of want to get your take on it. But you talk in your introduction, and I wrote all kinds of things just in the introduction pages, but you talk about God speaks through beauty, which touches our senses and captivates our heart. Do you think our society has an appreciation for beauty these days, or understands that there is that true beauty brings us to God? What's going on with that, do you think?
Yeah, I think that we are created by the Creator with that innate sense, and I think of my own case. I was not born and raised Catholic. I didn't have access to all the great beauty and the richness of the tradition of the church. I grew up in a real small, rural Protestant church with whitewashed walls. It was a very kind of Calvinist aesthetic there.
Yeah.
But something in me always appreciated beautiful architecture. I can remember seeing, coffee table books or calendars, photo calendars of, the great cathedrals of Europe and the spires. It lifts your soul upward. So I think of my own experience there, and I would say everybody's got this innate ability to do this. Our culture, though, has reduced a lot of human activity to just functionality. Right. So we think of churches, and we think of school buildings, and even libraries, for example, and the way they've developed in the postmodern world, the 20th century. You've got things like cubism and brutalist architecture that it's just really more functional,
right?
And it doesn't inspire, right? And that's why the great cathedrals and even the libraries on the greatest of our educational institutions, the great universities, what do they have? The libraries at the center, and it's a beautiful building that leads our minds and hearts upward instead of just in a functional way.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go please.
I was just about to say what I'm trying to do, or what I was trying to do with the book, or part of what I was trying to do is the eyes are the windows to our soul, and windows, if you think about it, go both directions, right? Somebody on the outside can see in. So in this sense, art changes our soul so that people looking at our soul can see beautiful things. But in the other way, windows allow us to see out to the world, and art, if we learn to look at art well and look at it in the way that, God opens up this conversation, we begin to see the rest of the world through that paradigm, and we can see beauty in anything. We can see beauty certainly in other human beings and human activity, but we can see beauty in in parts of nature, and even things that like we're in the middle of or we're ending the fall season and we're in December and we're getting to winter, like the depths of winter, and but the cycles of life and seasons are even beautiful, that God has ordained it this way, and just being able to develop that sense of sight for understanding the world in that way, I think, is important too.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And I think, you're so right that so often we look at things around us as being we want to be practical. This isn't practical, but that also leads us then to not understand, to what you're calling functionality, right? That it's just so that we're efficient and everything functions. And I know there was a church in our area that as they were, I don't remember exactly how it happened, but they realized there was a beautiful painting in the nave of the church that had been covered over at some point. And so they went through this restoration, to bring this back, and it's beautiful. But there was some consternation on the part of some that, why are we spending this money to restore this, right? And so where we are walking kind of that fine line all the time of this inspiration that comes to us, but also a practicality, and how do we find that balance? But I think when you're talking about beauty, it certainly appears that this is something that really does touch the soul, because there's stuff I look at that means nothing. I look at it and go, okay.
Right.
And then there are other things that I look at and I go, oh, wow. That is amazing. And I want to kind of take us, because I do want to look at some of these sometime throughout the show here. But before we kind of jump into that, like I said, people are familiar with Lectio, and it's very kind of, there are steps that we go through. Is it kind of the same way with Visio Divina, or is that more free-flowing in a sense? Lectio's free-flowing too, but I mean, we kind of have in this, we do our ratio, meditatio, but do we do the same kind of thing with Visio?
Yeah, there is a pattern or a paradigm that can be used, and I want to start by saying even if somebody doesn't know it, they can approach a visual image, a painting, for example, and just have a conversation with the Lord about particular details. Okay. Oh Lord, this is at the center of this painting. What's at the center of my life? For example, if Jesus is at the center of the painting, is Jesus at the center of my life? It's just really basic like that, and it can be free flowing. And with Lectio Divina, the more you get into the paradigm and the more you do the steps, the more it can flow freely and fruitfully. There is a bit of a structure that could be there. So first is you would approach the painting, and you would primarily notice the visual center. Where are your eyes drawn first? Okay, that's usually what the artist. That's one of the main points the artist wants to convey is drawing your eye, and it doesn't have to be the exact middle of the painting, right? It can be anywhere. And then other than that, this is where some basic understanding of art and the technicalities of art come in. All art is made up of 5 basic qualities, and that's line, shape, color, texture, and depth. And so if you use any of those, what are the main lines in the painting, for example? So the one that I think of right off the top of my head deals with the second Sunday of Advent and John the Baptist preaching, and there's a very clear line in the middle of the painting that's that's very clear when you
Yes.
look at it. So
Yes.
there's line, there's shape, right? So I think here of Raphael's Transfiguration, which I also deal with in the book. There are multiple triangles. The one, that's a traditional point. The point is upward, but then there's another one where the point is it's inverted and it's down, which gives us theologically gives us a sense of God is Trinity. But in the incarnation, God came all the way down to touch earth, right? So
right.
there are things that you can get from shape like that.
Okay.
Color, I deal a lot in the book with the meaning of color in particular pieces of art. So blue means something, red means something. The artists didn't just randomly, pick a color and put it on the canvas.
Right.
Everything means something, and then. Texture, right? And this would be things like shadows and things like that. I deal quite a few times in the book with the meaning of shadows and storm clouds developing, which is significant for my own life, and that's ultimately what I can give is what I receive from my own Visio. Right. And then depth, the Renaissance particularly gave us this artistic reality we call perspective, which is you can get many layers. Like it can look like 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional canvas, but the artists will often use figures in the background, to express certain things. And again, even if the artists didn't particularly mean that thing, the beautiful thing about Visio is if I'm looking at it, it's my own conversation with God. And if any of that opens up a conversation with God, it's valuable. Right.
And God could be inspiring us each in different ways, right? That speaks to our own situation.
Right. So that would be my last, related to my last point about Visio. So if you find the visual center and these particular qualities of art, you just kind of spiral outward to the edges of the image, and you'd be surprised how many artists put important details for our spiritual lives on the edges of the paintings. And I think particularly here of Murillo's Return of the Prodigal Son, again, which I deal with in the book, where it seems to me that the second son in that prodigal son story is a lot closer to our own hearts than most of us realize.
Right,
we are very often the second son. And it seems to me, again, this is my own reflection, it seems to me that he's over in the shadows, kind of looking at what's going on, and, of course, could be envious and could be, but how do we find ourselves in the shadows of the moral life because of our attitudes about how somebody else has received mercy or something like that, right?
Right.
So those would be some particular steps that could be taken.
So Derek, let's say somebody's like obviously listening and they're thinking, "Wow, this sounds really interesting. I've been doing Lectio, but I've never done Visio." And they decide they want to incorporate more of that into their prayer life. Now, granted, buying your book would be a wonderful first step, but what like all of these things you mentioned, shadows, color, texture, is that something that is easily found, that they can find this and read about it so they have an understanding of it when they start to engage these pictures?
Yes, there's a quick Google search on any of those
meanings.
Particularly like the color, right? For example, if you were to Google the meanings of different colors in art or something like that. Okay. There are plenty of articles, and I relied on an acquaintance of mine who writes for another publication to kind of. And a couple other sites too, but it's really easily available on the internet. But any good art like coffee table book is probably going to deal with that. I am so surprised, or I'm so inspired by the fact that we have information available to us everywhere, and we just so often miss it, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it should be very easy to find those kinds of things and then start doing the Visio.
Yeah. I remember years ago, when I was teaching at another university, I did an interdisciplinary seminar where I did like the theology and the kind of the government stuff, and my friend did all the literature and art and architecture. And it was just during the medieval time frame of church history. And so I was enthralled with her part of it because, you know, I really never got much about art in high school, and even in college, I didn't get a lot of it. And so it was cool to hear her describe, you know, well, when there's a palm branch with this person, it usually indicates that they were a martyr. And, you know, and she taught how to look at different portraits of saints and find things that would give us a clue of who they were. And I remember one of our final projects was to actually go to the art museum, and they have a beautiful, here in Toledo, they have a beautiful area, or they did back then, I haven't been there for a while, that had paintings of various saints and just religious art that the kids walked through and drew all this stuff. And I thought, you know, a lot of people go, oh, art, you know, but when you really understand and you really look at what we would call good art and religious art, there's so much beautiful art out there. It really does lead to a deeper understanding of what's going on, and it does draw you into it much more. And so that knowledge becomes so important.
Well, right, for centuries, until what we know as the modern era, you know, the 19th century, really, most people were illiterate, so their education, their formation in the faith particularly, was by music and by images. And so, you know, these images were intended to teach things, and that's why lots of the artists put in what they did, the particular details. You know, it's just such a great way for people to learn or to augment, like you said in your experience, the stuff I already know can be augmented by these images. And then, of course, I'm going to come back to it, this prayer, this conversation with the Lord that opens that up all the more.
Yeah,
right?
It's wonderful. Well, Derek, we are already at the end of the first half of the show. This is going so fast. Second half of the show, audience, I hope you will join us on the other side of the break, because I do want to talk with Derek about some of these the paintings that were chosen for his Advent reflections, and also, you know, something for us to think about as we continue. We're almost at Christmas when you hear this show, but a good thing to do is, because he's got a great one here on the Magi too, which was all new to me. So come back on the other side of the break, because our guest today is Derek Rotty. He is a freelance author who lives in Jackson, Tennessee with his wife and 5 children, holds an advanced degree in history and theology. He's written extensively on Catholic history, culture, evangelization, catechesis, and family. And we're talking about his new book, Praying with Sacred Art. So come back on the other side of the break. You're listening to The Virtuous Life. I'm your host, Pat Odie Murray.
Well, as a teenager, I didn't really see how relevant religion was in my life. In my early 20s, I began to look at other faiths. Well, I understand as a Catholic that the things that I was given at a very early age, those things never ended. They're still with me. That's what drew me back. Because the Catholic Church is worldwide, there are so many different types of people that come to the church, and it's a place where I feel accepted for who I am. I'm where God wants me to be, and I feel like my life can be used for what He wants now. And when I came back, I said, Lord, you were waiting for me the whole time with your arms open wide, and I have come home.
If you've been away from the Catholic Church for whatever reason, we invite you to take another look. Visit CatholicsComeHome.org today.
Thinking about separation or divorce? Rotty is a Christian peer ministry designed to help troubled couples regain the health of their marriage. It helps spouses reawaken the love, trust, and commitment that originally brought them together. Retrovai has helped tens of thousands of couples around the world. To learn more about Retrovai or to register for a weekend near you, call 1-800-470-2230 or visit us on the web at www.helpourmarriage.com.
Hello and welcome back to the Virtuous Life. Today I'm so excited. If you've listened to the Virtuous Life, you've heard this gentleman before. His name is Rotty, freelance author who lives in Jackson, Tennessee with his wife and children, and he holds an advanced degree in history and theology, and he has written extensively on Catholic history, culture, evangelization, catechesis, the family, and we are talking about his new book, which I found quite enthralling. And I'm going to lay it with all of my other kind of meditation books that I use in the morning because I want to kind of slow down a little bit. Sometimes when I pray, I get rolling, like I just go from one prayer to another to another. And this book reminds me, okay, let's slow down and let's enter into this, what we've been talking about the first half of the show, Visio Divina. So in this half of the show, Derek and I are going to be talking about, we're going to plunge into the chapter, which is chapter 4, and it deals with the fourth Sunday of Advent. And he does a great job in this book. He writes on each of the fourth Sunday cycles. So he does A, B, and C in this book. But I want to start, it's Joseph's dream. So welcome back, Derek, and lead us into the painting that you chose, why you chose this one, because I'm sure there are plenty others to look at, and then your reflection on it, because it's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, first I would tell you, you mentioned this, there are 6 paintings related to Advent, and there's obviously not 6 weeks, and that's because the last 3 chapters there are the 3, for the 3 years in the cycle, the lectionary cycle, but also the last 2, the Annunciation and then Mary's visitation to Elizabeth, are central to the last the daily readings in the last week of Advent, right? So every year the church from December 17th to December 23rd gives us the same set of readings, and that's
Hello.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry, that's okay. I missed you there for a minute.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Something happened on the phone. Anyway, so I just want to mention that those are both there too. But
so
Goya's, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so even though those are the Sunday readings of the fourth Sunday of Advent, we can still use those in prayer during that last week of Advent. Okay, great. Go ahead. Tell us about this fourth Sunday.
So Goya's The Dream of Saint Joseph, or Saint Joseph's Dream, it was one that I found. Of course, there's a rich tradition of art depicting Saint Joseph, and but again, as I did the Visio or did the Lectio on this, the contrast, or not the contrast, that's not the right word. The theme of Joseph and his tending to Mary, but being very receptive to whatever the Lord has revealed. Those kinds of themes came out, and Goya's painting just, I thought, captured that better than anything else I could find. In this image, the angel is the center, right? Which is, angel is the word for God's messenger, right? So it already opens up a conversation about what message the Lord might be giving to me. Joseph is asleep in this. Of course, in the gospel, he receives this message in a dream, but it causes me to ask, am I sleeping in some way? And the Lord's trying to get a message to me that I may or may not be ready and able to receive. Or also could give us a point to reflect is, I might be so open to the Lord that I'm ready to receive at any time, even if I am asleep. So, those are the types of things I mean by having this extended conversation with the Lord. And everybody's is going to experience this a little differently. Everybody's going to have slightly different answers to these questions, and that's okay. That's what it's meant to do.
Right.
I look specifically at the left-hand edge of the painting with Mary. Mary is not central in the image, but she's prominent in the image, and she's very pregnant, right? And now that I'm even looking at this again, and this has been 3 years since I wrote this this article the first time, I don't quite remember exactly what I wrote, but it looks almost like she's in a cave-type setting, okay?
Yes,
so that gives us a little bit of a sense of Bethlehem. But the image, or the part of the image that I think I was really drawn to most, was Joseph's cloak, which is a kind of tan brown color, which is significant in art of humanity. And we know Joseph is, of course, fully human, but the scriptures tell us he's a righteous man, and the color of the cloak can give us the indication that of his righteousness, of his right relationship with God, of his virtue. And then other details are like the walking stick.
Yeah.
Okay? The walking stick that is there in the bottom right corner that, he walked with Mary from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and then from Bethlehem to Egypt, right? So
right.
we get these and it opens up a question of, am I willing to walk where the Lord sends me, even if it's not comfortable, even if it's not my first thing that I would want to do? Am I willing to walk where the Lord sends me? And that I think for all of us, that question is really central to the to the moral life, to the life of discipleship. So,
right.
There's of course even more there, but there are other images that we can get to too, or if you want me to keep going.
Yeah, Derek, I do want to ask, because there are two things that I see in here regarding color. Okay, so we see there is it looks like a red cloth of some sort, whether it's a cloak, I don't know, next to the walking stick. Does that, what does that mean to you? Red always to me means martyrdom, blood, or the Spirit, but I'm not sure if that is a good interpretation with this.
Yeah. So yes, that's right to notice, because it contrasts deeply with the with the rest of the painting. I think as I meditated on this, I think it also refers to, and I guess this is a type of martyrdom, you would say, it refers to his future relationship with Mary, which is going to require what I mentioned just a moment ago of, I don't know where the Lord's leading me, and it's going to involve walking to Egypt, and that's going to be uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it because it's what the Lord's asking. Right. And then also, Joseph he knew when he got into this relationship with Mary that she had been consecrated to the Lord, and that this was going to be a virginal marriage, so to speak. And that's a sacrifice,
exactly.
Right? That's a way that we are laying down our lives. And I thought that cloak being, prominent but off to the side was an interesting detail that Goya painted in there, especially
for this time frame, because this time frame, the idea that he's being told, no, take her for your wife, don't worry about that. Everything's okay. Everything will be fulfilled. And that idea that, and then he does take her into his home. So the idea here is we're seeing this. And the other question that comes to mind, and I noticed this, is the angel has this kind of blue wrap around him, and Mary is obviously her wrap around her is blue, but she has kind of a reddish pink dress. Are those colors tied together somehow, do you think?
Yeah, and I don't remember if it was exactly in this meditation, but there's one in the Christmas season on Jesus being found in the temple. Blue, and this is why Mary has traditionally been portrayed quite a bit with blue. Blue is a sign of divinity, right? It's a sign of the the total transcendence of God, right? So if we see Mary, with a red kind of dress, you might say, but then cloaked in blue, that would be a sign of her humanity and her sacrifice of her virginity, and then of course walking with the Lord.
Right.
But she is cloaked in that divinity. Not that she's divine, but she is overtaken by God's divinity. And so in Goya's painting, those would surely be related, right? This is a messenger of God, which is why the angel has the blue cloak, and then Mary off to the side as well.
Yeah. And one thing is, I'm just looking at it as we're talking, I didn't notice this before, but Joseph's foot is very clear. And I never noticed that before. And as you were talking, I thought about that whole idea of, we can see his foot, the walking stick is there. This whole idea of what he is going to be called to do on behalf of the Lord. And what are we called to do on behalf of the Lord? Sure. And how often are we sleeping?
Right.
We need to be woken up.
And I would tell you that as I looked at that detail too, what do you notice about the shape of his sandal or the straps of his sandal? It's cruciform, right?
Yeah, it is.
And that all of these details are pointing us to the nature of sacrifice and what Joseph sacrificed. But what, again, the point is us in that conversation of, what am I called to sacrifice?
Exactly.
What is God asking me to give up for the sake of his kingdom, for the sake of his message?
Yeah. So we can't stop at what we see in the picture itself. We've got to always pull it into our own lives. And as we were talking, Derek, obviously the fourth week of Advent's a little short because the 25th is on Thursday. So when this airs on Monday, we will be getting ready. Only have a few days before we hit Christmas. So I do want to spend, because you do a nice job, there are two in here if we hopefully have time for them. One is the adoration of the shepherds, and the other is the adoration of the Magi. So I'd like to kind of maybe spend a little bit of time with those if we can before the show ends. And if we got time, we'll try to squeeze in another one. But tell us a little bit about, because this is an interesting, not again, when you think of the shepherds showing up at the manger, what I see here is not what I expect to see. I mean, I always think of kind of, more general. This is a very up close kind of intimate scene. Can you give us a look at this?
So Gerard van Honthorst is the artist, and he became one of my favorite artists in this process. But as you learn about him, one of the things that you'll notice if you look at all of his art except for this piece, includes Jesus holding a single candle, or at least all the ones I looked at.
Wow.
Jesus holding a single candle.
Okay.
And then you notice the contrast here that there's no candle in the center of the image. And I would point you, in contrast, there's one a couple of chapters later, the Holy Family in the Carpenter's Shop, which is another Honthorst where Jesus is holding the candle. But what do we notice about that? It's not Jesus holding the candle in this image. It's that Jesus is the center and Jesus is the source of light here in this painting, right?
Yeah.
Because the way that the light is falling on all these other figures, it's coming from Jesus.
Exactly.
And so that's the point that he intends to make. The shepherds have these various reactions. One seems to be covering his eyes due to the brightness of the light, and then others are very looking very endearingly, and Joseph, of course, is there and in a very prayerful posture of meditation, just because he's had his dream, and so that's one of the things you can track in art is particular figures over the course of their development too. But in this painting, and I mentioned it in the chapter, one of the things as I did this Visio, I noticed on the right-hand edge there's an ox or a cow, maybe a steer, but probably an ox, and it's almost not visible unless you look very closely. But then at the bottom there's a ram, and this reminded me, and I remember I happened to be doing Bible in a Year while I was doing this, and all of a sudden the passage from, I believe it was somewhere in Numbers, came up where or maybe it was Leviticus, that the Lord intends to use an ox and a ram as the sacrifice, right? And of course that detail points us right to the center of this painting, that Jesus takes the place of the ox and the ram as the sacrifice, the perfect sacrifice. So, and again, just the way Honthorst uses light and contrasts light with shadows is really important in his work. So, I don't know what else you've got as far as details that you want to talk about, but I love this painting. I love Honthorst.
I can see why, and I think you're right. I mean, the thing that, like I said, first of all, I think the thing that jumped at me first, just pulling it, was knowing that this was Adoration of the Shepherds. That this isn't how I pictured or other scenes that I've seen. This really is more intimate. I mean, they are like right there. And that light is, to me, the big thing too. I mean, when you said that in the chapter, I go back and I'm looking at it, and it's like, the light, there's no a light coming from anywhere else in this picture. It is just radiating from Christ. And it's, Mary's face is the most brightly lit. I mean, it is just, you can just tell that she has this such a connection with this child. And then Joseph's, everyone who is close to the Christ child has this light on their face. And I think, wow, what does that kind of tell me about staying close to God and what that should do or look like in my life? I just really loved, and a lot of the stuff that we talked about color before comes through in this painting too. It's just wonderful. Right. I loved it. It was excellent. Right. Well, I want to move into, and I know, I think the epiphany will happen before they hear a new show from me again. So I want to go to Adoration of the Magi, because I as I told you while we were on a short break, I didn't read the whole book because I wanted to stay very focused on the Advent and Christmas season. And I've never seen this. And my first reaction to it was, oh my gosh, who are all these people? It's kind of like a photograph where you don't know who those people are. And so, this was amazing. There's so much in here. At first I thought, this is really busy. I mean, like, so busy. I don't even know if I can digest this. But then reading what you wrote really helped me. So tell me why you chose this. Again, another one that I wouldn't have thought that would have showed the Adoration of the Magi. And then tell us a little bit about it.
So it's by Peter Paul Rubens, who as I went through this project, I think Rubens has become my favorite artist. I've got a lot of favorites.
You do?
Rubens, and this one particularly, and one of my purposes in presenting these paintings and this book is really to get people to slow down and realize, wow, there is a lot of conversation that has to go on with the Lord about the details of my life, right? I have to spend time pondering, and so including what you call a very busy image was somewhat intentional. That it's going to take quite a while to unpack this, right?
Oh yeah,
and it did. It took me a couple of weeks to really unpack just the painting.
Yeah.
So, of course, I remember the point about the visual center, and Rubens, paints Jesus, the infant Jesus, as the visual center with his light emanating, and the Blessed Mother behind him, and Joseph behind her, which, pick up all these themes that we've already explored here.
Right.
But what I really focused on was the whole retinue of figures that were traveling with the Magi,
Mm-hmm.
and of course in tradition we think of them as three, although that's not told to us in Scripture. We don't know if there were only three, but we typically associate that with the gifts, right?
Right.
The gold, the frankincense, the myrrh.
Mm-hmm.
But what you notice about the Magi here is they are of different, what you might call ethnic nationalities or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They're different skin colors, which gives us a sense of the point that the biblical authors were trying to make too, is that these are coming from the nations. It's from the whole world, and the whole world is ordered toward Jesus as Messiah and King.
Mm-hmm.
The colors, as you mentioned, the color of red, the color of blue is there.
Mm-hmm.
But again, there are details outside of this that I think are important for our walk with the Lord. One of them being, like, for example, the slaves who were coming with the Magi are ill clad, right? They barely have loincloths, and they're the ones who are carrying the burden of the extra gifts, right? So
right.
Typically we think of just one little box of gold or what. No, they brought the gold of the nations. That was something that really stood out to me with this painting. And then there's clearly other servants who aren't slaves, but they're dealing with the horses, right? And this gives us a sense of the different classes of people who are all called to Jesus, right? It doesn't matter about our economic status or which nation we come from. You see horses and camels and dromedaries, and all of creation is pointed toward Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's that. And then you've got, in the very background of the crowd, you've got soldiers, right? Like perhaps Roman soldiers, that, there are connections there with, the flaming torches that they're carrying. And that, of course, points us to, Holy Week. It points us to Jesus's arrest and crucifixion that is already, foreshadowed here, and Fulton Sheen, who I've written extensively on, does a great job of making this point in his book Life of Christ, that it's from this moment, like, he's preparing his crucifixion, he's preparing for his crucifixion, and so Rubens draws out that point. Of course, the angels at the top of the scene are they draw us back into that biblical narrative of what what angels do in the process of salvation. But what I really appreciated about the angel here, at least one of the angels, his hand is pointing upward, and you can tell a lot about an artist's intent by where they point hands. And the angel's hand is pointing upward, which ultimately is, hey crowd, this is all meant to bring you to the heights of, the highest good that you can experience. Even though we experience it in a very material state with a baby, right?
Right.
And then even the background beyond that is the gathering, kind of storm clouds, or the cloud of smoke, but it's dark, but off to the side above Jesus, there's a little bit of light poking through, and
is there a ship in the background too? It looks like there's Is there a ship in the background too? It looks like a mast almost over in between the guy in blue and the guy in red. It almost looks like a mast of its ship.
Well, I guess it could be. I took that as like a lantern that was on a swivel.
Okay.
And
sure.
But this is the beauty of if something is unclear, these artists were gifted enough to make things clear if they wanted to, and they might leave it unclear for the sake of the viewer having this conversation with the Lord. And that's what this is all about. That if you see something slightly different than I see, that's okay, as long as it opens up this conversation with the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And now that you say it, it does look like a lantern. But the other piece of this, I think, Derek, that stood out to me, and it didn't even occur to me, because I always looked at the painting first before I read what you said. And that where this experience is occurring, it isn't occurring in the stable or in the cave. They're outside of a building. So like, it's almost like they come out to meet like Christ and Mary and Joseph come out to meet them versus just the opposite, which says a lot.
Yeah, and that's, again, the artist is probably, I didn't have the benefit of talking to Peter Paul Rubens, but that, you can, again, no detail is wasted in this, just like we say it with Scripture, that no detail is wasted in Scripture. Mary, of course, brings Jesus to the world through her, through the Annunciation and the virginal birth.
Right.
And the meeting of Jesus and the world is the precipice of, we're always on the precipice of, we're coming to meet Jesus, but he's already made the decision that he's coming out to meet us too, right? So we're always responding to his grace.
Wow. Yeah, I that was like, again, anything that's kind of takes me out of my, my conclusions or things I've seen in the past, to me, really speak to me about this whole thing. And the idea, I think, too, which was, I said it was busy, but it was, I think, again, our sense was always just these three guys on camels showed up, right? And this picture shows us a kind of a caravan that they would have traveled. I mean, they had to travel a long way. So they would have had a lot of supplies and a lot of people with them. And so this, again, brings us information that we probably would have just looked beyond or overlooked in the past. Anything else on that one, Derek? Because we are almost at the end of the show here.
No, I think no. I mean, there's obviously more, but for the thing I would say to your listeners is just enter in and ask what details you see and what the Lord's trying to speak to you through them.
Yeah, and I would encourage again the audience, if you can get your hands on this book, because to me these pictures, to spend time in prayer with them, are amazing. And we don't have time to get to the Holy Family and the Carpenter Shop, but oh my, I love that artist rendering of that you chose. It was just amazing. Well, Derek, thanks so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. God bless you. Have a Merry Christmas and a happy 2026.
You too. Our guest today, Derek Rotty, freelance author who lives in Jackson, Tennessee with his wife and 5 children, holds his advanced degrees in history and theology. He's written extensively on Catholic history, culture, evangelization, catechesis, and the family. And you can go to Derek Rotty, ROTTY.com, and find out more about his work. But this book, Praying with Sacred Art, is a real treasure. So as you prepare to celebrate Christmas this week, don't forget, we've still got a few days of Advent left, and take time to maybe look up some of these pictures, some of these wonderful portraits of these events in the life of Christ and Mary and Joseph, and allow them to speak to you so that the Lord opens your heart in these remaining days of the Advent season. Have a blessed remaining Advent and Christmas ahead. We'll talk to you next year. Bye-bye.